Hello, and welcome to the Channel of Stories. Dear listeners, before we start the story, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like and share in the comments where you are from. Thank you. Here we go.
She was just Mira. No surname. No hometown. No traceable past. Her name passed from village to village like a whispered legend, always in half questions. Did you see her? The one with the storm behind her eyes? No one ever knew where she'd come from. She arrived like snow, quiet, beautiful, impossible to stop. Mira lived years in places most maps ignored. Her boots, split at the seams, had carried her across glacial ridges and dry riverbeds. Once, during the first year of her vanishing, she lived in a cave carved into a cliff face above the Arun River. The cave had no door, just wind and echoes. She would sit in the dark for hours, wrapped in wool and thought, listening to the breath of the mountains. People called that kind of silence sacred. Mira knew better. It wasn't sacred, it was surgical. It stripped you down. In that cave, she'd remembered everything she tried to forget. A man's voice in another language. A child that never was. A fire. In the second year, she stayed in a monastery where no one spoke before sunrise. The nuns there smiled with their eyes and smelled of boiled rice and wax. One of them, Pema, taught her how to mend her boots. Another died in her sleep during the coldest week of the year. Mira wept, quietly, into her bowl of butter tea. No one asked why. She became good at disappearing. Good at staying still. She could sit unmoving for hours, cross-legged, her breath slow and steady. Once, during a week-long vow of silence, a monk told her, "You are the only outsider who truly understands stillness." She didn't reply. She never would have. Mira didn't want anything from the world. Not friendship. Not comfort. Certainly not love. Love had once been fire. It had burned her to ash. Now, she was smoke. She drifted. Delhi was an assault. After years of whispering winds and prayer bells, the city hit her like a scream. Her first breath of the capital's air was thick with exhaust and cumin, hot tar and old rain. The noise never stopped. Not at midnight. Not at dawn. It pulsed like a second heartbeat in the pavement, cars honking, fruit sellers shouting, dogs barking at phantoms. Mira's ears, used to hearing footsteps on monastery stone, flinched with every backfiring rickshaw. Her hands trembled slightly when she paid for a bottle of water with the last of her rupees. Her scarf clung to her neck like memory. She didn't let her eyes linger on anyone. Too many eyes looking back. She didn't want to be there. But she had no choice. Her documents, what remained of them, had been lost in a monsoon flood 2 years ago. A temple caretaker had stored them under the floorboards. Gone. No passport. No ID. Only stories, and border agents didn't take stories. She found a room above a motorcycle repair shop. One bare bulb. A mattress that smelled of old sweat. Mira didn't complain. She had slept on gravel and bamboo slats and even once on a pile of rice sacks in a storage shed. She could survive anything. What unsettled her wasn't the discomfort. It was the closeness. People, everywhere. Bodies brushing against hers in the street. Men who stared too long. Women who muttered and then turned away. Her food dwindled fast. She bartered when she could. Helped an old woman mix henna in exchange for a cup of dal. Translated a dusty scroll for a foreign couple and got paid in samosas. She avoided contact, but necessity pressed her closer and closer to the city's throat. Then came the bookstore. She didn't plan to walk in. She was just seeking shade and a moment of stillness. The sign said Books Brews. The bell over the door jingled like a memory. Inside, quiet. Cooler. The smell of paper and cardamom tea. A man at the counter looked up. His voice was soft. "If you've got a good story," he said, "tea's on the house." Mira didn't reply. She just sat down, opened her journal, and started to write. He noticed her before she noticed him. Adrian was sketching when she came in, head down, movements fluid but guarded. Her shawl, soaked from sudden rain, clung to her frame like it had grown there. She scanned the room in a single, deliberate sweep. No wasted motion. No fear, but no welcome either. The bookstore was his favorite haunt in Delhi. A place where maps lined the walls and the owner let you sip tea for hours if you read quietly. Adrian came there to sketch routes. Not of the city, he didn't care about Delhi's traffic or temples, but of the places in between. The wild places. Forgotten paths that barely held together in monsoon season. When Mira sat down across from him at the communal table, she didn't even glance his way. She had a worn notebook and a half-broken pen. She began writing with the intensity of someone trying to anchor herself to the earth. Adrian, curious, stole glances. She didn't wear jewelry. No phone. No watch. Just calloused hands and the faintest scar across the bridge of her nose. After half an hour, he said, gently, "What are you writing?" She didn't answer. Another sip of chai. He tried again. "I sketch what I've lost. Maybe you write what you've survived." This time, her eyes flicked up. They were dark, unreadable, but not unkind. She studied him, his tousled hair, his quiet posture, the compass inked on his arm. "That's north," she said, nodding at the tattoo. He smiled. "Only if I believe it." She didn't smile. But she closed her journal. "Adrian," he offered, "hand out." She didn't take it. "Mira. Is that your real name?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Is Adrian yours?" He laughed, and something inside her shifted, a warmth she hadn't expected. Not attraction. Not yet. But attention. The real kind. The kind that didn't demand anything in return. When she got up to leave, he didn't stop her. But the next day, she came back. And chose the seat across from him. Again. She didn't know why she returned the next day. Maybe it was the stillness in his posture. Or the way he didn't push. Maybe it was the way his compass tattoo looked like it had weathered something real, like it had been earned. This time, Adrian didn't ask anything. He simply pushed a fresh cup of tea toward her, the kind spiced with cardamom and ginger. Mira didn't say thank you. But she drank it. They sat in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that was deliberate, not awkward. When the bookstore owner put on soft music in a language neither of them recognized, Adrian finally spoke. "What's the longest you've ever gone without speaking?" Mira didn't hesitate. 49 days. He blinked. "Why?" She looked out the window. A child was playing in puddles. A dog barked in the distance. "Because words felt too fragile for the truth," she said. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. They started walking together after that. Nowhere in particular. Markets. Side streets. Once, a half-collapsed shrine where people still lit candles. She taught him how to ask for fruit in Hindi. He showed her how to tell direction by the moss on old buildings. On the third walk, he gave her a gift. It was a tiny brass teacup, barely big enough for a sip. Around the rim, someone had etched wind symbols, Tibetan, she realized. "For your breath," he said, handing it to her. "What?" "You hold it like it's not yours. Like it might leave again. I thought maybe this would help you keep it close." She stared at him, surprised. "Where did you find this?" "A market in Dharamshala." I was looking for something else. What? He smiled. A reason to stop running. Mira didn't respond. But she held the cup carefully, as if it were made of something more than brass. She didn't know it yet, but that night, she dreamed of Adrian's voice, not words, just the rhythm of it. Like a wind chime in her memory. And she woke with the brass cup still in her hand. The kiss happened on a Tuesday. It had rained for hours, the kind that transformed Delhi streets into rivers, sweeping wrappers, leaves, and yesterday's promises into the gutter. Mira hated the rain in the city, it felt too hot, too dirty, too loud. But Adrian loved it. He said it reminded him of France, of small windows and fogged glass and stories read aloud with coffee. That evening, they ended up beneath a crooked awning, sharing mango slices dusted in chili salt. The fruit dripped down their fingers, the spice sharp on their tongues. A goat wandered past. A rickshaw splashed through a puddle. Somewhere, someone was playing a sitar. "You don't like rain," Adrian said softly. "It's different in the mountains," she replied. "There, it cleanses. Here, it drowns. You look beautiful soaked." She turned to him sharply, as if the words were dangerous. They were. "Don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I'll believe you. And I'm not built for belief." He didn't apologize. He just reached for her hand, slow, steady. And when their fingers touched, it was like striking flint. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't even dramatic. It was a quiet surrender, her lips tasting of spice and his of rain, the city holding its breath around them. When it ended, Mira stepped back. Eyes dark. Breathing shallow. "You don't want me," she said, almost a warning. "I didn't say I wanted anything," Adrian replied. "I just kissed you." "That's dangerous." He smiled. "You've walked through landslides. This is what scares you." She almost laughed. Almost. After that night, something shifted. They still met every day. Still sat side by side in the bookstore, still walked through alleys that smelled of incense and fried dough. But now her shoulder brushed his on purpose. Now she let him read her notes. Now she leaned into the warmth of his presence, like a plant turning to light. He never pushed. Never asked her to stay late. Never pried. But he paid attention, to her silences, to the way her hand trembled slightly when someone mentioned love, to how she'd stop in front of jewelry stalls and then turn away like she'd sinned. He was stillness. She was storm. And for the first time in years, Mira didn't want to run. Mira didn't talk about her past. She had perfected the art of erasure, cleansing herself of old names, old bruises, old dreams. People didn't ask. Those who did didn't last. But Adrian never asked. He waited. And somehow, that made her want to tell him everything. They were lying on the roof of the bookstore one night, sharing a thin blanket, the brass teacup between them. The moon was thin, like a scar. Below, the city hummed its restless lullaby. Adrian was humming too, some tune in French that made her chest ache. She stared at the sky and said, "There was a man. In Nepal." Adrian didn't move. He had kind eyes and slow hands. "Promised we'd go west. Start over." I believed him. I packed my life in a red satchel and waited at a checkpoint in the snow for 3 days. She turned her head. He never came. But the fever did. Adrian still didn't speak. I almost died in a clinic with no lights. A monk found me. Said I'd been praying in my sleep. I didn't even believe in God. Silence stretched. "There was also a child," she added, her voice hoarse. "Or the start of one. Gone before I could understand what it meant to keep anything." Now Adrian moved, just enough to brush his hand against hers. I never said goodbye to her, Mira whispered. Or him. Or who I used to be. Adrian didn't say he was sorry. Didn't try to fix it. Instead, he offered his palm, open and steady. She placed her fingers in it. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I know. But I needed someone to know. Just once. You're not broken, he murmured, eyes locked to the stars. I'm patched together with silence, she replied. And yet, you speak. That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't touch beyond the fingers. But something passed between them, not love, not yet, but the right to witness each other's truth. And that, Mira would later realize, was even rarer. The email came on a morning like any other, Delhi still half asleep, the air heavy with heat and fried oil and yesterday's dust. Mira opened the message on a borrowed phone, standing in a patch of sunlight near the staircase. Her new passport was ready. She could leave. Any day. Any direction. All the roads she'd mapped in her journal were now possibilities again. She stared at the screen too long. The letters blurred. Her thumb hovered over the delete icon, but she didn't press it. Adrian was in the kitchen, humming as he ground coffee beans. The scent curled toward her like a promise. She packed that night. Quietly. No fuss. It was muscle memory by now. Fold, roll, tighten the straps, check for the teacup. Adrian didn't ask questions until she stood by the door, bag slung over one shoulder, hair tied back like she meant it. You're going, he said. Not a question. I don't stay, she replied. He nodded once. Then, after a breath, can I come? Mira blinked. She hadn't expected that. Not from him. Not from anyone. She looked at him, the bare feet, the sleep-creased shirt, the man who had asked for nothing and given her everything. You'd follow me into nothing? She asked. Adrian walked toward her slowly, deliberately, like he might scare her away if he moved too fast. You're not nothing, he said. You're the storm and the silence. You're the first thing that's made me want to be still. She swallowed hard. Looked away. I don't know what comes next, she whispered. Neither do I, he said. But I'd rather not know it with you. She didn't say yes. But she didn't close the door behind her when she walked out. And that, Adrian understood, was her version of an invitation. They didn't take a plane. Planes were too fast, too final. Mira needed slowness. To hear the earth breathe under her again. To feel the weight of every mile between the life she ran from and the one she hadn't yet imagined. They boarded a southbound train with no air conditioning and sat on wooden benches beside a woman who sold fried bananas and a boy who never stopped singing to himself. Adrian didn't complain once. Even when a rat crawled over his foot in the middle of the night. In Myanmar, they crossed the border on foot, slept in a bamboo hut with holes in the roof. Adrian read her poetry in the mornings. Mira laughed more than she had in years. It startled her sometimes, to feel joy not pulled from survival, but rising naturally, like steam. In Laos, they watched fireflies drift over the Mekong. She asked him what he missed from his old life. My sister's laugh, he said. French bakeries. Maps that don't change. He asked her what she missed. She said, being invisible. In Vietnam, she got sick. Not just a fever, delirium, vomiting, the kind of sickness that steals days from your memory. Adrian didn't leave her side. He sat with a cool cloth, reading from her notebook when she couldn't speak, feeding her spoonfuls of broth, whispering, "You're not going anywhere. Not yet. Not without me." When the fever finally broke, she cried, half from relief, half from fear. Because in those days of drifting in and out, she had reached for him in sleep. And he had always been there. They arrived in northern Thailand by accident, meant to pass through, just for a night. But the lake was so still, so impossibly quiet, that they stayed. 1 week became 2. Then a month. Then longer. The village wrapped around the water like a secret. Mist rose each morning, and by dusk, the sky turned orange and pink like a child's watercolor painting. For the first time in years, Mira didn't feel the need to vanish. She took a job teaching yoga to travelers. Adrian helped at a small cafe run by an elderly woman who called him Little Fish and insisted he was too thin. They adopted a dog that barked at coconuts and refused to swim. They named him Thunder. They weren't lovers in the traditional sense. They were something gentler, deeper, weathered and woven, like old fabric. They slept in hammocks, shared dreams in the dark. She still flinched when touched without warning. He still whispered before kissing her, just to ask permission. One night, under a canopy of stars, he asked, "If we never get married, are you okay with that?" She looked at him sideways. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I think I already am. Married to you. In the ways that count." She was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "And what if I leave again?" Adrian leaned in and kissed her temple. "Then I'll go on loving you from wherever I am." Mira wanted to argue. Wanted to say love didn't last, couldn't be trusted. But instead, she pressed her face into his chest and let the stillness of the lake seep into her. For the first time, staying didn't feel like surrender. It felt like breath. Years passed. They moved like tide and moon, sometimes together, sometimes apart, always returning. Mira drifted back to the Himalayas for one long season. She said it was to bury an old prayer. Adrian didn't ask which one. He just packed her tea leaves and a scarf she once said reminded her of spring. They wrote letters, real ones, with ink and smudges and sentences that trailed off when emotion got in the way. He sent sketches of their dog curled up on a cafe stool. She sent pressed flowers and pages of her journal she no longer needed to keep. Then one evening, Adrian looked up from the cafe grill and saw her standing in the doorway. Same shawl. Different eyes. Her hair was silver at the temples now. Her face was thinner. But her presence, unmistakable. Like thunder in the bones before it rains. She didn't say anything. Just walked in barefoot, her old brass teacup dangling from a thread tied to her wrist. "I kept it," she said. "I kept the fire on," he replied. She crossed the room slowly. No rush now. No fear. And when she reached him, he didn't kiss her. He just touched her face like a map he never forgot how to read. "I thought I had no home," she said. Adrian smiled. "You were the home." They sat in the garden that night, side by side, no candles lit, no music playing. The lake reflected stars like it always had. Mira leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "The ocean doesn't forget where it's been." And Adrian, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, replied, "Then let's never leave shore again." And they didn't. Not in any way that mattered.